These are the Royd Minstrels. The Minstrels were designed by Joe Ackroyd, who started his company in the UK in the early 1980s. Royd's first release came in 1982 with the A7 speakers, followed in 1984 by the more sophisticated Coniston. The Minstrels were released in July of 1993, and they were an instant success. They became one of Royd's landmark speakers, just like the A7s were 11 years prior. Sadly, Royd Audio closed shop in around 2002. And even more sadly, I believe Joe Ackroyd passed away sometime in the 2000s. Relatively recently, however, the company name was purchased and the new owner plans to build speakers in keeping with the original Royd philosophy, although from what I've heard, their offerings have fallen a little bit short so far. The Minstrels are floor-standing, small enclosure speakers, approximately 26 3/4 inches tall with their spikes in place, by 4 1/4 inches deep, by 7 1/8 inches wide. Their cabinets are canted backward and attached to plinths that are 7 1/8 inches wide and 9 1/2 inches deep. The plinths have accommodations for spikes, which I used on my previous pair of Minstrels, but not with these. When I picked these up from the cellar, they came with rubber feet, and so I just left them that way. The Minstrels house a 5-inch doped paper driver attached to a cast chassis. The doped driver has a sticky coating and sometimes has problems with gumming up on the speaker's center pole. I've not had this issue on any of my pairs of Minstrels, but I've read a lot about it. They also house a 19mm soft dome tweeter, which is crossed over at 3 kHz. Their frequency range is listed as 33 Hz to 20 kHz, but while the Minstrels have surprising bass for their size, I don't believe they truly plummet to those depths in real-world usage. Their sensitivity is listed as 87 decibels at 1 watt per meter, and the recommended amplifier power is listed as 20 watts to 80 watts per channel. The speakers are side-ported, and so owners have the option of facing the ports inward or outward, depending on the orientation, which works better in their given room. Speaker wire connectors vary depending on the iteration of the Minstrel. Some only have banana plug connections, while others have binding posts that accept banana plugs, spades, or bare wire. They also have foam rings surrounding their tweeters to help with cabinet reflections. They were finished in real wood veneer and a variety of vinyl wrap finishes including rosewood, cherry, black vinyl lamination, white, and gray, and possibly some others of which I'm unaware. They also came with removable, fairly transparent cloth grills, some of which were rectangular in shape and others which had a rounded bottom. As a point of note, though, I do all my critical listening with grills off. I sometimes put the grills back on when having guests over, both for protection and improved appearance, but that's about it. I first heard the Royd Minstrels at a little audio store in Toronto called Hi-Fi Faux Fum, which specializes in British gear. At the time, I was looking for an integrated amp, so although I noticed them, I didn't pay them much attention. However, they did stand out in my mind as being a very interesting little design, albeit just from a cursory look and listen. After owning several pairs of British speakers, for example Rega, Neat, Epos, and Monitor Audio, when I saw the Minstrels available online, I decided to give them a whirl, as the Epos 14s I was using at the time were simply too large for my living room. And I'm glad I gave them a shot, because from the moment I fired up the Minstrels, I knew they were something special. Immediately, I remarked that the sound is light, lively, bouncy, clear, and provides a very good sense of space and image into the music. They possess a very fast, open, crisp, and revealing mid-range and treble. Bass is incredible for a speaker of this size, and in the right room, plummets almost as low as you'd ever really need. What the Minstrels lack in bass depth is more than made up for by the bass quality. The bass is tight and easily revealing of differences in bass notes. These speakers worked surprisingly well in my condo, where they were a perfect fit to the size of the room. They filled up the room with high-quality sound, which was not only pleasing while seated in the sweet spot, but also when walking around the room, which was a real selling point for me. In the sweet spot, their performance approached my Epos 14s in that particular room, although they were not quite as good and were noticeably less refined in the mid-range. Although, admittedly, the Epos is very stiff competition in that regard, since their mid-range is pretty incredible. The Minstrel's treble is good and quite extended, however, it's not particularly refined or subtle, and it does have a hint of grain to its sound. The tweeter's airiness, though, lends itself to vocals taking on a breathy presentation, which I quite like. The tweeter can also be a little unruly, and some will consider it a little too bright, as it can become a little too hot on some recordings. A warmer amplifier can mitigate this. My warm and robust sounding Sugden is a great match with the Minstrels. Conversely, though, a cool or thin sounding amplifier will not be a good match with these speakers, and very poor or thin sounding recordings will sound flat and shrill, and may result in the sound becoming intolerable, especially in the wrong room. The Minstrels are not very picky at all with placement. You can plop them down almost anywhere in the room and get good sound. But, as with most other speakers, placement is very important to reap the absolute best of what they have to offer. Unlike most speakers, however, moving them away from the wall did not necessarily result in less bass. Moving them out into the open seemed mostly to affect their dimensionality, making the sound deeper, wider, and more three-dimensional overall. A good recording will reward you with sound quality that greatly belies the Minstrel's diminutive size. Bass is fast and not billowy like you'd get on some larger speakers. It goes fairly low, very low considering the driver size and cabinet size, but it does lose some amplitude in the lower registers. The bass quality is very, very good, if lacking a little bit in quantity. The Royds will produce what bass is on the recording, but they won't embellish with bass exaggeration. These speakers won't rattle the walls, but they do provide a solid open soundstage and a good degree of fullness at low to medium volumes. They're suitable for smaller to medium-sized rooms, preferably no larger than 11 by 15 or so. In that type of setting, the speakers can fully energize the room and allow them to really shine. They become somewhat lost in rooms that are just too large for them. Although still providing good sound, they lose the fullness that they're capable of in smaller to medium-sized rooms. In that type of scenario, a subwoofer would be in order, which is exactly the case in my current situation. The side ports assist with placement options in terms of sound performance. Depending on the room, one may get good results by having the ports facing each other. In other rooms, pointing the ports outward can be beneficial. I found that facing the ports outward was the better option in my small condo, whereas facing them inward is much better in my larger living room in my new apartment. The Minstrels can really float a nice sonic image, providing a very good sense of space and dimensionality. Now, although the mid-range provides quite an open, transparent window to the music, it's not the best I've ever heard in this regard. It is very good, however, make no mistake. These speakers lean to having a more three-dimensional type of sound, floating images in between and around the outside of the speakers, rather than having a wall of sound type of sound quality that other systems may deliver. As alluded to earlier, the Minstrels are limited in their output volume capability. Beyond a certain volume, they compress and they'll break up if pushed. Having said that, the maximum volume they're capable of should be more than enough for most normal listening. But if you want to rock out with high volume, these are not for you. The Minstrels do a great disappearing act, and the music never seems to come from down low to the ground as the driver height would imply. The image they throw is higher than the speaker height itself. The musical image is fairly solid and stable, keeping singers and instruments from wandering from their location in space. The Minstrels do not seem to possess any really obvious boxy sound, which is a fairly common trait amongst relatively inexpensive British designs. My Rega Aras, for example, they require very careful positioning to avoid an overly boxy sound. I love these Royd speakers. They have a lot of qualities I enjoy and very few points against them. Their small size and excellent sound quality make them very suitable, nearly full-range speakers for today's small-sized condo spaces. Further, they're revealing enough to easily display differences amongst associated gear during times of upgrade, and will play very nicely with gear in much higher price brackets. On that note, when driven with the same system, these speakers outperformed a pair of neat Mystique 2s that I had in my condo. Since those speakers retailed for between $2,000 and $2,500 Canadian at that time, to say this was impressive is a huge understatement. The neat Mystiques are allegedly better speakers, however, in that room with that gear, the Minstrels took the cake. This is clear proof that system synergy and room matching are of utmost importance with respect to audio reproduction. The Minstrels are super fun speakers that, although not perfect, have an uncanny ability to put a smile on my face almost every time they're played. This is what I'd call audiophile speakers on a budget. They'll give you a good taste of what very high-end designs can accomplish. Now, the Royd Minstrels are becoming more and more rare on the second-hand market, so if you do see a pair, don't hesitate. Grab them before they're gone. Even when I buy different speakers, which happens very often in my world, I'll still hold on to these Royds. In my opinion, they're just too good to let go of again. Now, if you are contemplating picking up a pair of Minstrels, buyer beware. Make sure to avoid using them with sterile, cold, or thin-sounding gear, as that would only exacerbate the Minstrels' inherent weaknesses. On that note, though, they play very well with British gear along the lines of Sugden, Name, Exposure, Creek, Cyrus, and Rega. Now, before I go, I'll mention that I also have a pair of Royd Minstrel SEs, the special edition that was released in 1998. I'll be making a video about those beautiful little buggers too, and in that video, I'll compare and contrast them with the original model. That's going to be a very interesting comparison because although the two models look so similar, they sound very different from each other. Now, if you want to make sure not to miss that comparison, don't forget to subscribe to my channel and hit the notification button, and we'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.